Welcome everyone to Total Carnage Listen-Throughs. I'm Admin 1 of Any Effects. Today we're revisiting Bowl of Heaven, namely the newer releases. The last time we listened to the album Say It Again. Neil Keener has been doing pretty well as far as holding down the fort of Bowl of Heaven. I don't know who all else is involved in terms of like outside contributors, but he's been, I think, increasing the prolificness to about the par that we may remember us bullies from, years of yore where they would churn out dozens a year. Looks like he's ramping up from the comeback in, I believe it was 2018. So this one is a Thoughtless Gift, 6 tracks. I don't know why I said 10. I was looking at the 1044, just getting an overall glimpse of the time lengths of each track. Of course, unlike before where it would all be like one very long track, which, in reality was in some ways several tracks kind of released as one. He's choosing to divide the tracks up. Or we'll see, maybe there's a kind of thread of continuity running through all of these. You never quite know, but still fairly lengthy by average track length standards at times. So let's start off with the first track of Thoughtless Gift. And by the way, just a few cursory comments on the artwork here. I see that these appear to be like just regular pictures of people, at least one of which looks like a wedding picture, but the faces are blotted out with white. Not only that, but in a kind of a pointed triangular fashion that calls to mind the plague doctors of old. So we'll see. Let's see what a Thoughtless Gift sounds like here. Skipping past the ad, when possible.
Feel comfort and joy because now all dentures are 20% off. Find the perfect.
Okay, let's see what we have here. Okay, an opening swallowing drone that's been punctuated by like a solid bass pluck. So we're in it. We've got the anticipation building. Time will tell whether it stays more or less in this zone or starts to build up into something else. It's always a roll of the dice with Bowl of Heaven, but part of it is the ride, focusing moment to moment. I'm hearing all these little frequencies kind of push out and taper off a little bit. Sound like guitars. It's interesting because I can hear the higher pitch, what sound like guitar notes, but it's a bit buried back. And there's also a bit of a lower drone, synth drone, it seems. I'm hearing on the right side, because there's, panning in the audio. On my right over here, I'm hearing some other guitar notes, but they sound a bit lower register, perhaps a bit buried, almost pitch impaired really, but they're kind of zigzagging across. So the classic sense of dread is still there. What's clear enough is that the lower synth drone tends to be rather constant, but the guitar parts, the higher register notes, are a bit more of a doodle in a way. They're kind of fluctuating. It's still kind of staying enough in the tonal range to convey a certain mood and kind of drive the track across. Now it's interesting, because I don't know if it's that I'm noticing something I didn't before, or if it's slowly creeping up the mix. There are lots of subtleties to the way that Bowl of Heaven mixes their tracks, but I'm hearing what almost sounds like a slowed down vocal, just buried very deep, almost like, well, a bull or cow. Now this is interesting because I heard a low drone and it started to build up to the kind of pitch and timbre that I recognize as being the same kind of high register guitar notes. So it makes you question, whether my perception of, the higher register and low register as far as what type of instrument or, implement is being used is actually illusion, and it's just a slowed down or sped up version of something else. find myself, questioning the source of everything more as I hear it, and as these parts kind of transform into the other. For that matter, I'm actually not sure how easy it is to hear. I did test the audio balance before starting this video, but it was with another form of music that's, more raw, kind of hard rock. And to that point, I might eventually do a Total Carnage listen-throughs for some of Neil Keener's rock projects like Planes Mistaken for Stars and Get Some, Woven Hand, etc. He's got several bands I think he's been a part of, but with this, the mix of sound is, subtler. In some ways it's quieter, it's not as brazen the way that heavy guitars and drums are. Anyway, sorry to talk over the music. Without commenting on it, that is. It almost sounds like the lower register is kind of distributing frequencies and sounds, especially in terms of panning, because the lower drone that I'm hearing is more mono sounding compared to the right and left panning that I'm hearing with the high register, what I think to be guitar notes. Seems likely because Neil Keener's a guitarist. And then every now and then I hear a drone that sounds like it's confronting and clashing with the predominant, tonality, if you will, of the main drones, but then it kind of goes back down. Now I'm hearing the high register guitar notes deviating a bit from, the really high register, going down a bit more, and these kind of sort of emotional denouements to really drive home, the perpetual doom and how it's kind of progressing, kind of tapering off. Although this is a fairly long track, albeit not by Bowl of Heaven standards, so we're about halfway through, I reckon. Yeah, a little over 5 minutes. There's a certain effect I'm hearing. I don't know how to describe it, at least not the technical sense. The impression I get is one of almost like a flower blooming. It's like it'll stay more or less the same pitch, but it'll be a bit more dispersed across the mix, whatever, or where I hear it in the headphones. I'm also hearing now the guitar notes more sustaining, ringing out a bit, kind of staying more on the same notes instead of fluctuating as much, so there's still that. Now I'm hearing, however slightly and imperceptibly, some of the drones kind of fading a little bit in the mix. Bowl of Heaven's music tends to be pretty gradual, so it wouldn't be surprising if they would use kind of a tapering off that takes a few minutes, where, in a lot of music, including my own, it would be a few seconds of ringing out or fading out, something. I wonder what the significance of the title is to this music. I think of a Thoughtless Gift. I always think of, say, the story, the saying, a white elephant. If I remember correctly, I don't recall exactly where it originates, so I would have to look it up, but, at least in one particular culture, a white elephant would be something that would require a lot of care. It would often be bestowed as a gift, but one in a way that would actually, perhaps even in some cases, secretly, intentionally, be a burden to the giftee, if you will. Just because of how much care it would take to care for the white elephant. Although I'm not sure the significance of it being a white elephant instead of some other color. Maybe an elephant suffering from albinism who would thereby require more care regarding sunlight or what have you. I don't know. So maybe this track would be to try and convey the dread of receiving a thoughtless gift. even in just, regardless of whether it's something along the lines of a white elephant, maybe in terms of just it being clearly given without thought. Maybe if that carries any significance with the artwork here. But yeah, the high register stuff kind of more abruptly stopped, whereas the lower drone stuff I could hear even as I was talking was maintaining a slow descendance. And then finally towards the end it just was all that you would hear, and it was dissipating.
Being vaccinated is the best thing that I could do to protect myself and protect my children.
Okay, next up is The Warming. The longest track of them all, about 10 3/4 minutes. Here we go with the panning again. I'm hearing a simple melodic strip of notes that's playing across different sides. It's kind of a muted, punchy synth, but I'm hearing more ambient ones sustaining in the background, kind of harmonizing within different ways, and then now I'm hearing the synth strings. And each subsequent layer that I'm hearing has less notes, or sustains them for longer. It's a certain kind of a timbre and feel that's new for me with Bowl of Heaven, but it is very much in line with the kinds of emotional, ambient electronic stuff they have done in different eras of the career, if you could call it career. It's interesting because, the addition of slower going, more ambient layers kind of makes the ones that they were just added on top of sound more like the original by comparison. When I say the original, I mean the first line that we hear, which is more, punchy and muted and, a bit more active sounding, where it doesn't sustain the notes as much, moves around more. I get that feeling with the second layer now relative to the third layer, which is the synth strings. But this sounds more like sort of waking up in the aftermath, so to speak, of the sort of dreadful event that you kind of get the feeling for in the first track. At least that's my interpretation of it. There's a sense of both, melancholy and relief, which may have to do with the fact that the track's called The Warming. So it kind of sounds in a way like Neil or whoever may be involved is, kind of figuring out different recombinations or permutations or whatever of note combinations between these three layers that vary in density with each other. Like there's, a set of notes that all three layers seem to fit in with. Also, I think the added more ambient layers tend to be a bit more variable in the phrasing. Maybe it just sounds that way because, they're slower. They take longer to be repeated as opposed to, the very first layer that we hear is more constant. Now I'm hearing yet another layer. This one sounds very constant. It's totally sustained and thoroughgoing. The highest register one yet. Almost like a buzzing, but a soft one. And it's starting to take over more, or at least some of the other layers are fading out more in the mix. So I imagine that this latest layer will end up serving as the basis for what may come next. The main question that remains is whether that next basis will be within a different key or different set of notes or not. Looking at the artwork. Looks like a book might be getting signed there. Looks like one person's handing the other a utensil, I think. There's a book in the other hand. This looks like it'd be a wedding. I see there's a peace necklace. This looks like a family photo. Just one person, and then someone holding up something. I don't know what. Looks like it could be a piece of artwork. It's a bit harder to tell because this is all black and white, of course. This could be like another family picture. I suspect there's crossover as far as the people involved between at least one of these pictures, or two of these pictures, not all of them. This is really interesting because here the entire bodies are almost completely covered by these painted white figures with those pointed heads, almost like a bird or again like a plague doctor. And here I'm hearing the lower rumbling layer changing a bit. It's a bit simpler. The notes are a bit closer together. In the beginning there were like 3 notes, now it's more 2. And they're played closer together, so it's a bit more like sudden and curt, if that's the word to use. And here we're getting layers that taper off, but not just in volume and not in pitch per se, but just like how high they seem to sit in the mix, if that makes sense. It's like some kind of oscillation going on with some of these notes. Now I almost wonder, because at least in the past, Bowl of Heaven has utilized some degree of mathematical formula to compose pieces, and I wonder if in a way it wouldn't be so out of character for Neil or whoever to purposely compose different layers and calculate at what point they would reach all the permutations if they were played on top of each other, given that each of them are of a sort of different length, and then end them at the nth permutation or recombination, whatever, to which all have been explored. It's an interesting concept anyway, and I'm sure that's been toyed with to some degree before. I like it though because the lower, more rumbling layer is kind of constant. It sets the foundation for the other layers to kind of wander over, and each of these kind of occupies more or less different octaves, I think, or just different feels. So I have the lower one, the medium one, the high one, and Sound like the high one is a bit more descending. Well, the lower one is more descending as well. But these layers sometimes they kind of move in opposite cadential directions, like almost towards each other. So it gives this whole piece like a feeling of emotional complexity, even though it's the same notes and feel being used all throughout. Like something that just this sort of constant catharsis or the seeking thereof that never quite ends. It just keeps going, and the finer details change, but it's sort of ceaseless, relentless in a way. That's one of the reasons why Bowl of Heaven is good to do these sorts of videos for, is that there are lots of nuances, changes, variations, subtleties, etc. about their music, but it still moves slow enough in a way. Usually, like there are different tracks where there's more abrupt changes or sections that you kind of have to catch, but here I don't generally feel as though I need to stop or go back the way I might with some other music. But that was interesting how it ended, in that it just kind of stopped but let a few notes get the last word in.
Do you have vendor information scattered all over the place?
As opposed to the
contracts,
more gradual fade out of the Thoughtless Gift.
History.
So this one is about 5.5 minutes long. It's called The Cold Rain. Right away with the emotional awakening synth strings. Kind of gradually progressing. And then having an occasional light plucking of, I think, a guitar string. It almost sounds like it could be sort of like an ambient object, the way it's being very sparsely played. So far, this one more has the feel like a straight ahead written progression, but very gradually carried out. Now I've just barely heard like a slight movement of, I think, some string, maybe a violin solo line. There'd be sort of subtle top layers that flutter in and out like flying objects or creatures. And even though I can sense the same general progression happening throughout so far, there are just these little, subtle, different layers each time. This is one of those tracks that I think tends to remind us how good Bowl of Heaven would be for soundtracking, really. Movies, documentaries, television, video games, audiobooks even. Yeah, this has even more of a feeling of sort of realization to it than the warming did. Like, I feel, that's just my subjective interpretation, but I feel the kind of a progression from a Thoughtless Gift to this one, in terms of, initial perceiving and then realization. I mean, I'm kind of skipping ahead, but I could see there's a theme of changes in the environment. There's the warming, the cold rain, leaves appear, sea of green, lay in tall grass. here I heard something interesting, because I heard the guitar line. Maybe I didn't notice this as much before, but it'll stay within the same set range of notes, but across iterations it starts introducing different little variations, like more diminished, almost chromatic descendants that gives a different feel of catharsis to the whole melody. And I'm saying diminished loosely, like in terms of less gaps between notes. I hope it's understood that I don't know that much about theory or anything. I'm just using kind of loose terms picked up from here and there over the years. Sometimes the way that parts of the progression may sort of dwell, or the ways that different I guess chords or notes are emphasized at different points across iterations, almost seems like it's about to go into a different progression, but it doesn't quite. But that might also just be because I'm more locked into the general flow of the progression and the melody, and so that I'm starting to hone in on different details of it. Here again, I hear just like very slight, almost imperceptible kind of swirling. This is definitely headphones music. I don't know if this can even come across at the volume that I'm playing it at. I think you hear the gist of it, and of course, ultimately, you all have to hear it for yourself without me talking, but this definitely is music that encourages listening. That's the case to start with, but I think especially when it comes to the subtle mixing decisions like this. Okay, and that was The Cold Rain. The next track is the shortest one so far and on the album in general. It is Leaves Appear. Find out soon enough, but if I may venture a guess, given the title and the length of a track for that matter, this might be a bit more buoyant, at least less completely melancholy, but we'll see. It's a very subjective interpretation. Seems like the kind of juncture in the narrative where it could happen. Yeah, maybe. First I heard just the initial same kind of dreary drone. Then I heard a strum of guitar strings that sounded like it could lead to something more buoyant sounding. But it's more like hints of it crop up here and there, and still that sort of lingering dread. I like how each of these little drones, these notes, these little however you call them, gifts here and there, to keep in the theme of the album, they slowly follow one after the other. It's like they really emphasize a general feel or note by being patient with it, having one instrument or layer do it, then another. Like there's one that's highest pitch yet, that just kind of the guitar string, I think. So it ups the feeling of suspense and fear. And now I'm hearing some kind of dragging sounds, more of the lower end, relatively speaking anyway, that are less melodic and a bit more like microtonal, oscillating a little bit. Almost like something dropping, like might start off as like a normal sounding note, and then it'll start doing that. This one keeps with the predominant mood of dread throughout the record, but maybe in a way it also combines that with a sense of relief, almost, that I get more from the track The Warming, even if that's mainly just the ascending guitar strums that appear here and there. I do hear more like a call and response feel between the different layers here, where, the drone will sort of taper off a bit, then after it's tapered off enough, the guitar will go dun, dun, and then the drones do their thing again, more or less reactivate. And I do wonder, how each of these layers were thought of and made, how much of pre-writing or improvisation was involved. Because I can imagine, in recording this, Neil or whoever, I'm just going to assume for now that it's just Neil, selected the timing and different measures or iterations of a melody in which to play what instrument. See, and again, sometimes across these iterations, like parts of a section sound like they'll be dwelling a bit longer, letting the feel of our notes just ring out just a little bit longer. You'll be waiting like, wait, is it going to change? And then sure enough, there comes again the response to that initial melody in the form of the guitar pluck or what have you. And there sound like multiple guitar layers, I should say. Like, it would definitely be physically possible to play these different, notes, but I guess just the way that they're mixed, like where one pan's like more left and the other more right, sounds like he recorded multiple guitar tracks. That's cool. They're letting that one low note rumble and then fade out. All right, the next track is Sea of Green.
Getting vaccinated is the best thing that I could do to protect myself and protect my children.
I was vaccinated not only for my protection.
I wonder what it'll mean, sea of green, like in a positive verdant sense, or more in the sense of like pollution. Neither would surprise me, really. Actually, this one so far sounds like the most major key in a way. Hearing a slowly fading in drone that even seems to sort of wave up a little bit, almost like a tide. Maybe multiple kind of string notes being played, a bit more buried in the mix, a bit more in the background. But you still hear the occasional patient texturing with guitar strings. Well, that sounds more like sort of a way to boost different layers, because it's more like the same notes, but now I'm hearing a bit more slight variation from the notes that we're hearing on the drone underneath. It almost sounds like something you might hear maybe in a church or something. Or not even a church, but like the soundtrack to a movie scene of a church, if that makes sense. Or like you marathon players out there, if you've ever played Tempus Irae, this reminds me a bit of some of the ambient sounds that you hear in some of the church parts. For that matter, this just sounds like stuff I've heard in some different documentaries, like at the beginning, where they're about to introduce a topic. Yeah, so far this one just kind of goes on and on with that general feel, as though you're kind of sitting ethereally in the middle of ocean, really. One with the ocean. One with the sea, rather, of green. And that's cool because I hear a strumming, but each one of those notes is sustained kind of over each other, so it's less like a sequence and more like a constant chord that across time is slowly changed, not just in volume, but even almost in pitch. Like, it sounds like the guitar strings, they almost become part of like this total drone because of the way that they're manipulated, or maybe it's more that like an electronic drone kind of pushes up over and around them as though to swallow them. So they sound like they've morphed into something, but they've really been swallowed by it. It's interesting. There's a slight dip at first in the synths, and they started to suddenly creep back up, and then they even jingled a little bit, like got a bit louder, and I don't know how to explain it, but it sounded more like they were plucked a bit more. And I always wonder about, little nuances like that, especially when they're relatively rare and brief. Like, was it just like a basic mortal, I don't know how to call it, maybe not necessarily like mistake, but just a regular mortal thing that didn't seem like a big enough deal to edit or anything, or is it more like intentional? Because I can imagine, someone like holding down notes all throughout, and then at one point, maybe for whatever reason, maybe accidentally they lift their fingers up, but it doesn't really detract from the rest of a track. It's probably not even meant to be noticed per se. It is ambient music after all, and that's definitely something that allows for looser, consistency with making notes. Actually, the more I hear, the more I think I sense some variation in the notes. Like, obviously there's a little variation in the guitar picking over the top, which is very sparse and spacious, but even underneath with the synth layer, the synth strings, I think at first I thought I heard just one constant note or chord. Maybe that was the case and it changed over time, but I started hearing it almost like arpeggios, but it's just very subtle. There's not a lot of punch to the notes. It kind of flows together like the flow of water. Sorry about that. Don't mean to make you see me scratch my nose all day. Now the upper register of the synth notes has faded away, and now you get the sense of resolution because it's just the lower ones, even though it's just like lower in the octave. Or a lower octave, I should say. As they're singing, now I hear like a faint noise. Sounds like a noise. Maybe it's just like kind of the brushing effect of one of the synth sounds, but it sounded almost like water once again. So this here is the last track now. This is Lay in Tall Grass. Sorry about these weird awkward interruptions. Maybe I should get some ad block or something. Probably doesn't cost me too much.
Yeah, it does.
There we go. Back to the dread. So once the initial simple drones come in, we start to hear like higher register descending strings of relatively active rhythm relative to most of the rest of the album. This seems to subtly shift moods quickly enough in that even though it's still like a minor key feel, it goes from the sort of sinister dread to something a bit more mysterious, then a bit more melancholy, then a bit more fearful, as though you were switching suddenly from the perspective of the fearer and the feared one. But here I'm hearing the lower and higher register kind of interact with each other constantly. Not in a call and response way per se, in the way that I heard was something like leaves appear, but like a very precomposed thing, constant counterpoint. And then at different points they'll sort of come to a resolution together and sit there for a little while, only to suddenly start moving again. It's just that the higher register, I think, generally tends to switch between notes more, which is often how it goes, like bass and lead. Yeah, this seems like it would be arguably the most, shall we say, neoclassical of them. In different points, the higher register, or maybe the lower one for that matter, but it's especially easy to notice with the higher one, is that it'll sound like it's about to rise up to a different kind of epiphany, but then it goes back down. Yeah, the overall feel and melody kind of slowly rises and falls, and they'll kind of cycle through some of the same overall moods, but not in the exact same ways it did the first time. So this one might be my favorite, actually. Either this or The Warming. At some points it sounds like, how I mentioned earlier that at times both layers will kind of meet at a certain crossroads and stay there for a bit. At other times it sounds like just one of them will, and you get to hear more of the different ways that that one ringing note or chord can be augmented with a lead. And other times the notes become less clear, as like the note seems to almost taper off in a way, or it gets mixed a bit differently, so it sounds less deep and more almost shrill. And that was interesting because it faded out at what didn't sound like a resolving note like you would often get with the other tracks in a lot of other music. So that was one of the latest albums by Bowl of Heaven, A Thoughtless Gift. I enjoyed it. I'll come back to it. I think I also definitely have plenty more new Bowl of Heaven releases to check out. And I definitely encourage you out there to keep on listening to them. I think whatever's still going on is still very unique and compelling in its own way. I know a lot of people are still kind of clinging to the Clayton era, which was also great, and including in all the subtle ways, like, releasing thousands of releases a year that were all hours long and such, but I don't think that music is any less potent nowadays. So the next album by them, Neil, whoever, would be Things That Are Lost. And after that is Who Will Watch Over Me. Interesting kind of comic-esque artwork there. And then Down and Back. There may be some other ones, I mean, countless ones from different eras of the band that I have yet to listen to that would be good to do Total Carnage listen-throughs for. Like, I never listened to Folded Hands. I heard this one and 19 Nervous Breakdowns, but not this one yet. And even just the ones that I've already heard would be worth doing a Total Carnage listen-throughs for, especially now that I have, accumulated more ideas and thoughts about what they're like. Right down to the very first release, Weed Problem from 2008. But whatever, there's so much to do just with that alone, and various other artists I'd like to do Total Carnage listen-throughs for. We'll see when, if I get into any of it. Until then, thanks very much for watching. Check out Bowl of Heaven. Alright.